Hi, Hazel. Thanks for accepting to be in this dialogue. And I'm happy that even though it's an evening for you, you accepted to be here. So, can you introduce yourself before we start the dialogue?
My pleasure, and thank you for the invitation, Roger. Um, so I'm Hazel Morley. I am I'm dialing in today from the west coast of Canada, so in the province of British Columbia, so just above the city of Vancouver. And I've been living here for the last 15 years or so, but I'm originally from England in the UK. And I have been connected to the thinking environment, to Time to Think, since the early 2000s. I think I first met Nancy Klein in 2003 and started, after having read the first book, Time to Think, started then training with her and then became a consultant by 2005. And really, since I discovered Time to Think, everything that I have done subsequently, training workshops, coaching clients, facilitation work, everything has been in a thinking environment because I just found it to be so beneficial and it's what I love to do. So that's really what I focus on. And my priority at the moment has been to teach the courses. I teach all of the Time to Think courses, including the qualifying one. I host our North American collegiate meetings, and I run workshops for Thinking Partnership alumni. So people who have attended a course of some kind and want to keep their skills fresh and up to date.
Yeah, thanks, Hazel. Yeah, so the next thing is, can you introduce what is dialogue before we start the dialogue?
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. So a dialogue in a thinking environment is probably the closest that we have to conversation, but it's not two people talking, it's two people thinking together. So we agree how much time we're going to take. We have a topic, a shared topic, and we have a question within that topic that we want to think about. So we consider what outcome do we want to achieve on that topic by the end of the dialogue, and then what question will get us there. So we get our question really clear, and then we both take turns to think about and to share our thoughts on that question. But it's not discrete turns where I might take all of 5 or 10 minutes and then hand it over to you. We kind of go back and forth in a bit more of a sort of, it's almost like a dance, really. You know, I share some of my thoughts and feelings on the question, then I will hand over to you, you do the same. And both of us are mindful that in our turn at some point, we're going to stop. We're not going to share everything all at once. And when we stop, we then hand it over to the other person for them to take a turn. So it's much easier, I think, in dialogue to pay attention and keep the promise of not interrupting when you know that your partner is going to stop at some point and give you the chance to speak.
Thanks, Hazel. So let's start the dialogue. So the question we are going to have dialogue on is, how do we live the component of encouragement in our lives?
Okay, thank you. So how do we live the component of encouragement in our lives? Maybe it would be worth starting with the definition of encouragement as a component, as a behavior, as defined in the thinking environment. And that is about giving courage to go to the unexplored edge of our thinking by ceasing competition of thinkers. Those may not be entirely all the exact words, but that's the essence of the definition. Giving courage to go to the unexplored edge of our thinking by ceasing competition as thinkers. So I think one of the first things that I notice about that definition is this idea of giving courage to another person. So how do I give courage to somebody else in order that they can think well for themselves, as themselves, go as far as they want to, far as they can in their thinking. And when they get to that point, how much further than that can they go? So giving them permission to think for themselves, out themselves. How do I do that without competing with them? And I think of all the different components that we have in the thinking environment, when I consider this one of encouragement, I can't consider it without thinking about a number of other components at the same time.
Yeah.
So for me, one of the first things is, how do I show up and offer my undivided attention to my partner, or if I'm with a group, to the other people in my presence? How do I show up and listen to them in such a way without interrupting and conveying a respect for them as the thinker, conveying my respect that I trust, I know that they can think well for themselves on this topic? How do I do that with my attention? How do I do that non-verbally? And so I think that's one of the first things, really, to really be mindful for me of how I'm showing up. How am I expressing this message non-verbally that they really matter, that their thinking really matters to me? And part of that is settling into ease, which is another one of our behaviors, another one of our 10 components. So making sure that I am not rushing, or I don't have any sense of urgency when I'm in the presence of someone else, that I am really settling in and sort of demonstrating that I genuinely am interested in what they think, what it is that they want to say about what they think or feel. And so I suppose attention, ease, the other component then that would come to my mind is one of equality. How do I level the playing field? So I might have more experience, I might have more authority on the subject matter, I might not, but if I do, how do I convey a sense of equality to the person that I'm with so that they feel equal to me in this dialogue that we've agreed to do? So as thinkers, how do we create that equality? How do we flatten any hierarchy or power differential that there might be between us? So those are the things that I start to think about first and foremost when I think about this component of encouragement. So I'm going to pause there, I think, Roger, and just invite you to share your initial thoughts on that question. How do you live the component of encouragement?
So the first thing that comes to me is I have to feel courage to give encouragement. And when I look at when am I not able to do, is when I am operating out of my fears. So when I'm listening to someone, like the way you said, right? If I'm worried about, or I'm fearful of the time and urgency, or I'm fearful that in this conversation I may feel small, or if there are times I have felt this in my, even now I feel sometimes that I'm wasting my time because the other person is talking nonsense. So typically I see opposite of courage is fear. And what I have seen in my experiences, if I am operating from fear, I think, as you said, even without words, I kind of radiate that energy. And that will ensure that the other person doesn't feel courageous. And the other thing that happens in this is when I do this, also when we operate from fear, somewhere I feel that the whole survival instinct shoots up. So survival instinct is like living in a jungle, right? So you go and kill the animal which is in front of you. So somewhere I think, I don't know, in my experience, do I, what do I do to remove the fears I operate from? And what do I do to help the other person remove the fears? Seems to be what comes to me as my initial thought.
Mm.
What do you think?
Mm. I think something you said there about feeling courage in order to give courage, I think you said. I do think this is a component that, we can set up the conditions, we can create a space, can't we, for somebody else, verbally and non-verbally to kind of encourage them to say something that might be unpopular, to say something that perhaps which is a bit controversial, to really show up and be their authentic self, because that's the whole point, isn't it, of being in a thinking environment, that you think for yourself, as yourself. And we can presence all those 10 behaviors, all those components that we know to create that space. But at the end of the day, we can't make somebody courageous. We can't make somebody feel safe to venture out to the sort of cutting edge, as we say, of their thinking. We can't make that happen. And so we do have to give ourselves courage. We do have to give ourselves permission, don't we, to be encouraged, to go to the places that perhaps we haven't ventured to before. And I think that's also about not distracting ourselves, not interrupting ourselves, not interrupting our thinking, which I think we can do. We can close it down. Like, I've been in situations sometimes when there's something that I've wanted to say, but I don't quite trust myself enough to perhaps say it. Maybe I feel too vulnerable. Maybe I haven't said it before. Maybe I don't have the level of relationship and trust with the person in my presence. So I'm not quite, even though they might have said this is a safe space, I'm not quite feeling ready to step into that. So I do think encouragement, this courage, we have to create it and feel it. And, both sides have to create it, don't they, in order for it to happen. Yeah. So I liked what you said about that. And I guess, when we think about the thinking environment, particularly, we talk about the thinking partnership session, and it is a partnership. So it is about both of us being willing and able to create that sense of encouragement in order for good thinking to take place. What more do you think?
Yeah, so what came to me is many a times, like the word you used, partnership, right? Partnership may not be equal in every sense, right? Structurally, capability wise, and all that. I think we have enough age, it can be hierarchy in organizations, everything. So that the whole thing is making the other person feel equal, even in midst of the existing inequality, I think is something very, very critical, because I don't know, just I'm remembering when I started as a consultant, I was 25 and a half, and I worked with a senior colleague whom I call as my first mentor. Mm, two, three things were very interesting. One, he will never interrupt. And by then he was 60. Okay. So he will ask me questions, listen to me, and again, appreciate. I think he lived all the 10 components, is what I'm recognizing. And I remember the first assignment I did with him, which was my first ever assignment. And he said the fee will be equal for both. And so this is one person with whom I never held back anything in terms of my thoughts, nothing. So, yeah, so what comes to me is, even if there is inequality in the outer world or in the structure, how do I make the other person feel equal? Seems to be the question that can help in encouraging the other person. Yeah. So in some sense, I'm seeing, like you said, multiple, I think difference and both difference and equality. Yeah, I think if I don't accept you are different from me, then I fight with you, right? Or I want to block so that I can protect myself. So I don't know, somehow equality and encouragement seems to, no, equality and difference seem to be contributing towards encouragement. So that's something that came to me. What do you think?
I agree with you, and it reminds me of a book that one of the Time to Think consultants wrote, Nick Chatrath's book called Leading in the Age of AI. And he talks in his book about equality and difference being a binary star. And I had to look up what binary star was when I first read that. But the fact that the stars are connected, but neither star shares the center. So I can't remember the exact definition of the binary star, but it's this idea that they're sort of attached in some way. And I think that is so true with difference and equality. Because if you welcome difference, but there's no equality, then you're kind of maybe favoring, one person's got privilege over another, or favoring one person over another, or one group over another. Whereas if there's equality and no difference, then there's some kind of like almost, as he refers to it, as a sort of artificial smoothing out. Not recognizing the divergent thinking and the different lived experiences and the wealth of difference that will be present in the room. So I do think difference and equality are two of the other components that do help us create this condition of encouragement. And, the more I think about it, Raja, I don't think in a way I can really think about encouragement in isolation of the other components. And if we think about how they're often represented in a diagram, it's with this, what we call the ellipse, where, you can see all the lines connecting all the components together to show that there is a relationship, they influence each other. And I think that's especially true of encouragement, because even feelings I'm starting to think now about the component of feelings. Like if you're really encouraging somebody to go to the cutting edge of their thinking, so to express themselves and truly create an opportunity for them to say whatever it is they want to say. Feelings might show up, and we need to be welcoming that, not shutting that down, don't we? And so that's another one of the behaviors that I feel contributes to this. We need to also be willing to be vulnerable, maybe, as the thinker. You know, if we're going to express ourselves authentically, be willing to acknowledge our feelings and express them appropriately. So again, it's this two-sided kind of responsibility relationship that we have going on here. And you know, the other thing that sprung to mind when I heard you speaking was, I wonder what, especially in the workplace, I wonder what people interpret internally when they hear us talk about equality. I wonder what message is received, whether there's a bit of insecurity felt sometimes, where there is a hierarchical structure of some kind, and we talk about flattening that in order that we treat each other as equals in, you know, thinking peers. I wonder if people feel a sense of threat when they think about equality. What do you think about that one?
So, so I talk about in India, we have quite a bit of hierarchy about everything. The way our mind operates itself is very hierarchical. I don't know whether all human beings are like that. So the moment somebody is saying something, I'm judging it as in my scale, where does it go? Right? So the moment I have started judging the other person's thought, I'm not encouraging, because I have gotten into competition of I am better or you are better. So I think the fundamental challenge I have experienced with encouragement is there are times I have felt when somebody comes up with a great idea, do I feel small in that moment? Or when somebody is sharing something and I think this is nothing, it's shallow. Why can't you think better than this? When that thought comes, again, I am radiating that whole thing of not providing encouragement. So I think somewhere I see encouragement is very, yeah. So let me think about an example. Where do I feel, where do I comfortably practice encouragement, right? Many a times with small children, we become very encouraging because we don't feel threatened, first of all. And also sometimes with small children, we want to create a condition of safety. So I think those are two things that is coming to me, which are core for actually providing encouragement. What do you think?
It's interesting when you say that, you know, with children, we don't feel a threat. I have been in situations when someone has given me the impression that, so outside of a thinking environment, somebody has given me the impression that they want to know what I think about something. And then the minute I start to try and express myself, it gets closed down because it doesn't align with what they think, or maybe I'm going into territory that makes them feel vulnerable or uncomfortable. And so they close that down because feelings are coming up for them now that that they're not, you know, feeling good about. And certainly when I was working inside a corporate organization, it never felt safe much of the time to express myself completely. And so I didn't. So I think there is this idea of threat, insecurity. I think sometimes as well, somebody else might be encouraging us. And again, it comes down to our part in this because we might be a people pleaser.
Mm.
And so there might be something that we'd quite like to say, but we decide that we're not going to say it because actually what's more important to us in this relationship is that we feel validated or we get approval or we're liked somehow. So we might not express ourselves fully and honestly for that reason. So yeah, I think it's really interesting, isn't it? That when we think about we live in such a competitive world, such a competitive society. How do we cease this competition between us, which is part of the definition, from a thinking environment? How do we encourage somebody by ceasing competition when actually that might make somebody feel threatened, they might feel insecure, they might worry that, well, if I encourage somebody else to give me their ideas, for example, and I'm the leader of this team, then does that mean that I have to then act on what they give me?
Mm-hmm.
What more do you think or feel or want to say?
I think what you said is very interesting because sometimes I have seen in some of the workshops I run, people feel if I listen, it means I am agreeing to the other person. Or if I listen, then I have to act. So I think that is another pressure that we put ourselves through, which stops us from encouraging. Because again, some kind of pressure comes, some kind of fear comes. And one of the things I have seen, at least in India, uh, people, what is discouraging is ridicule and sarcasm. So whether it's in a meeting or a one-on-one, people very comfortably say, bully someone saying that, hey, what you're saying is nonsense or something they do so that it literally shuts people. I've seen it so many times.
Mm.
And the other thing I see apart from that is, especially in certain parts of India, the culture is very good with sarcasm. And somebody says something, one sarcastic comment, that's it. So I see these two, I think avoiding ridicule and avoiding sarcasm, I think will be at least two things that I can think of as very critical for encouragement.
Mm.
And obviously interruption is the other one. Yeah. So what do you think, Hazel?
I wonder if sometimes with very good intention and well-meaning, people interrupt, they insert themselves, and not knowing really the damage that it does to independent thinking. So I'm thinking about many instances in the past when I've been trying to think about something in someone else's presence, and they have, I guess, identified perhaps with something that I've said, and so then been so tempted to just share that, often with, as I said, good intention, or to ride on the back of something that I've said. And then they move it on, they create another idea, but then all of a sudden then it becomes much more about them and their ideas. And then I've kind of started to feel inferior and like, well, their ideas are better than mine, or, my ideas have kind of been overlooked somehow. And I don't think people necessarily realize that they're doing that. I think sometimes we get very excited, don't we? And I've experienced this myself as well. Get very excited by what you hear somebody else say, and that triggers another thought in you because very often we're listening to respond, and so that response stream is very active. We're kind of judging, evaluating, thinking about what we think about when we're in that listening mode, and then we just want to kind of insert ourselves. And I suppose when we're in a thinking environment, the purpose is different, isn't it? The purpose is the independent thinking of the other. But in day-to-day situations, we might not have contracted for that. We might have agreed to that. We haven't committed to that. And so how can we encourage other people to do their best thinking, or at least exhaust all of their thoughts first before we insert ourselves, is perhaps the question to be thinking about. Can we just delay introducing our thoughts even just a couple of seconds longer than we perhaps ordinarily would, to let somebody finish their thought or finish their sentence? So yeah, sometimes I think people don't intend to be setting themselves up to be superior or better than. Sometimes I think they get caught up in the excitement of it all, and they start to identify with what they hear. So maybe we talk in thinking environment terms about our attention being in different streams. And one of the streams is our attention is very often on what we're listening to, what we're hearing. And so naturally, in a dialogue, there's a conversation going on, and we are assessing it, evaluating it, maybe judging it. And so I think to really give encouragement in the way it's described in the thinking environment, we want to be quietening that stream, don't we? We want to be setting aside some of that judgment and evaluation and that temptation to want to respond to what we're hearing. And it's not easy to do.
Yeah, so what you talked about, something that came to me is about, I don't know how many years back, an event that happened between my son and me, maybe 6 years back. So there was some conversation about I am overprotective of him. So when he told me that, I said, yes, I am overprotective. There is no, I don't want to deny I am overprotective. And then I remember he said something which was very simple but very powerful. He said, if I'm falling, will you allow me to fall instead of picking me up? And then he said, if I fall, I'll reach out to you. So, because this is something I'm looking at, sometimes it is also our overprotection of the other person that can discourage them. So this is something that suddenly popped up, because it's not only that competition leads to this, our overprotection of another person also can become discouraging, especially within family, especially with younger people. I think this can become, so yeah. So overprotection. The other thing when I'm speaking about this that comes to me is also somewhere tendency to approve the other person's thought. So I have seen this. So there are people I know, the moment they say something to a person in authority, they are looking up for approval. So that again is something that, even though these two are not about fear, but somewhere both of them are making the other person feel you are not equal. So yeah, so these are two thoughts that came to me. Basically, approval and overprotection can block encouragement. What do you think?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, approval is so loaded, isn't it? I think we all seek approval at some level from some people in certain quarters of our lives. And so, that idea that we all want validation. And I think it can take takes a lot of courage to make mistakes. It takes a lot of courage to to put yourself out there and to be yourself and truly say what you think and feel. Knowing that you might not get that approval. Somebody might disagree. Somebody might not like what you have to say, might not like what it is that you want to do, etc. So yeah, I think it's and perhaps that comes back to conditioning as well. I think about my upbringing. I'm British. I grew up in a very traditional family where children were seen and not heard. And so, I wasn't used to speaking up. I wasn't used to finding my voice and expressing my voice because it was often shut down. And so then when I did speak, of course, I wanted approval. I wanted approval from people, who mattered to me. And then that carried on in school. And that carried on when I went to work. And as I said earlier, I worked in a lot of organizations where there was a lot of hierarchy. And it just didn't feel safe. So it was safer to say something that I thought would please. It was safer to say something that I thought would get me the approval. But yeah, I think you hit on something that's really important and very real for a lot of people. Mm. I was thinking about where I have felt encouragement, and the different places that I felt encouraged. And one thing that came to mind was when I'm in a yoga class. So there's a hierarchy there in that, the yoga teacher's more experienced, she's more flexible than most of us in the class, but the way she speaks to us in the class really encourages us to show up on our mat wherever we're at in that moment and to create our practice in a way that meets our needs for that hour. So, okay, we might have been able to have gone further, in a certain posture, like in the class the previous week, but what is it that we need today? Where do we need to go today? How do we need to look after ourselves? And so all of that is welcome, and we are welcome to show up and be just as we are and take whatever it is we need just as we are. And I love the way the yoga teacher creates a sense of equality in the class with the way that she invites us to be ourselves and thanks us at the end for joining her for the practice and practicing alongside her. And I think it's this idea of appreciation that can go a long way to help us feel encouraged. To be affirmed for showing up. Doesn't matter how good you were on the mat, how bendy you were in that class that day, but the fact that you showed up and you did that for yourself and that she appreciated or he appreciates you being there, I think that can go a long way to feeling encouraged to show up again the next week. So where in your life have you experienced encouragement that perhaps has been a little bit different from the workplace context or family context?
So, yeah, so if I look at I can think of yeah, I was maybe 8 or 10. I used to be in a boarding school, and there was a teacher who was teaching my mother tongue Tamil, and I was good at it, but he would actually encourage me by giving more challenging tasks. And then I think appreciation was quite a lot. And he will kind of, in some sense, the message I received from him from everything, if I look back now, is about you're capable, you can go forward. I think it is, yeah, that's the statement that comes to me. And I remember, I don't know how many years back, I went and met him years back with my wife and son. And he said something which was very touching. He said, in my entire teaching career, he is the best. So, in some sense, in a moment, I'm thinking, okay, it can't be like everybody's the best, but in the moment, accepting the other person can be the best in their own form, I think is what the encouragement is all about. Not saying that they can be better, they can do better, just accepting that everyone can be their best. And what is now is what it is I think what I can think of when I look at this experience. And because of which even now, yeah, even after I don't use my mother tongue anymore, but even now, if I want to write, I will write without one grammatical mistake. So, so yeah, it's the I think it's the kind of encouragement that person gave me as the teacher, and he was very good. Yeah, in some sense, he never for even though I respected him, I never felt small in front of him. So I think, yeah, really, and I think apart from that, if I look at every time I was able to do something, or when I was able to do something which is beyond the normal, the people who were with me were encouraging. And I think it's almost like encouragement gives you the extra strength when you are doubting whether I'm thinking and doing something right, right? At that time, encouragement becomes like a booster so that we are able to go to the unexplored edge of our thinking or unexplored place to do things. It's just because of that one, I don't know, it feels like an energy drink. So, yeah. So, what do you think, Hazel?
Yeah, I love that. I guess it just reminds me of the value of appreciation, appreciating people for who they are in this moment as they are, not expecting or needing them to be anything different. And saying it, the definition of appreciation in the thinking environment, as you know, is noticing what's good and saying it. And so doing more of that. And I think that can help us to feel like an equal partner as well with somebody else when we hear that appreciation. I think it helps to create that sense of equality that we've been speaking about, and certainly creates that ease. Doesn't it? That is so important as well for encouragement, knowing that you're in the presence of someone who's not rushing you, who's not creating tension in some way for you to kind of get to your point, or come up with some amazing thought or idea, but just have that relaxed presence that's very encouraging. So I think appreciation can be non-verbal as well. We can show appreciation non-verbally as much as we can express it verbally. And I think that can go a long way as well for helping somebody to feel encouraged. Yeah. What more do you think?
Yeah. What you said kind of summarized the whole thing, is what I felt. So Hazel, the quality I want to appreciate in you is simplicity. That stood out quite a lot. And thank you for being.
Thank you, Roger. And the quality I want to appreciate in you today is generosity. So I feel a huge generous spirit from you. So not only in sort of inviting me into this dialogue and to the collegiate meeting, but the generosity with which you are sharing your wisdom, your learning, your experiences with the thinking environment. So generosity is definitely something that I appreciate and respect in you today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure. I've loved it.
Yeah. Good. Okay.